Hey everybody, my name is STU HAMM and I'm a bass player and Mark bass lover and user and endorser. I'm here to answer a few questions about my career in music and my experiences with Parsec and Mark bass. Man, I got my first electric bass for Christmas in 1973, which means that this year will mark 50 years that I've been playing bass. For about a year before that, I played only upright bass, and I started to play because where I grew up, the junior high school and high school big bands were very competitive, and we were perennial state champions. So I learned to play bass, reading changes and walking through big band charts, and then, of course, played music from a very early age, coming from a family full of musicians. And it was about a year or so that I'd been only playing in jazz bands that I got asked to sub for a rock band. And I remember the first song we played was Whipping Post, which is appropriate because it's in 11, and that would set me up for all the odd time music I would play with Steve Vai and all those ex-Zappa guys. Well, I obviously used whatever the school had for the first few years. I can't remember exactly what that was at the time, but boy, bass amps play a real pivotal role in my decision to become a bass player because when I was about 11 years old, a rock band set up at the local park on the tennis courts, and the bass player had one of those custom amps with the two portholes in it and the sparkly padded Naugahyde siding, and I just thought that was so cool. So I believe the first bass amp that my parents bought me was a Century, PV Century 500, I believe. And I used that until I got a taste of my first solid state amp and then realized that I was a Class D kind of guy. What are the top moments of my career? Well, I would have to say that the biggest one is that I still enjoy playing and am still motivated to practice and get better. It's a reason to get out of bed every day, knowing that there are musical things that I need to accomplish and new music to listen to and create and play with my fellow musicians. But I've had so many. I'm just so fortunate. I wouldn't say lucky because it was hard work, but fortunate. I remember sitting in my dorm room at Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, and with a copy of Guitar Player magazine, where you would vote for the annual readers poll, the best rock guitar player, best jazz guitar player. So I wrote in Stanley Clarke for best jazz bass player and Chris Squire for best rock bass player. And I said, man, someday I'm going to be up there. I'm going to win these polls. And I am the only person to win both of those, best jazz and best rock bass player. And I did it 2 years in a row. So that combined with playing some of the venues that I saw my heroes play when I was young has been something that is really, you often have to stop and realize how wonderful life is. Well, as I said, I went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston in 1978. And the first semester there, I met this guitar player who was making quite a name for himself. Every time he played, there would be a huge crowd around him. I found out his name was Little Stevie Vai from Long Island. And we had a band called, come on, I can remember it, Morning Thunder. And I played on Steve's audition tapes for Frank Zappa, and we had a lot of musical collaborations. I eventually ended up moving out to California to live with Steve and record the albums Flexible and Passion and Warfare. And his good friend Joe Satriani, they were from the same town. And I believe Joe was Steve's teacher, being a few years older. Was looking for a bass player because he was doing his own thing, and Steve recommended me, and that's how I met Joe Satriani. And those are the two people that people most would associate me with. But I guess my favorite musical collaborations have been with all the great drummers that I've had the pleasure to play, from Dennis Chambers to Gergo Borlai to Joel Taylor, Craig Blundell, Chad Wackerman. Man, the list goes on because there's just something about bass players and drummers that's the best thing there is. When did I first discover Mark Bass? You know, I must have seen ads for them and their bright colors in Bass Player magazine and in ads and stuff. But I distinctly remember, you know, I'd been part of Satriani's band when he did the G3 tours. It was usually Satriani and Vai and a third guitar player. The first tour, it was Eric Johnson. And then they had John Petrucci and Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Robert Fripp. So, of course, I decided to do a bass version and called it originally enough B×3. And I had Jeff Berlin on bass and Billy Sheehan on bass and myself, two amazing bass players of completely different styles that I just was enjoy seeing and hearing them play every night. And we were playing New York at BB King's, and I walked into sound check, and Jeff had these two smaller amps set up on little pedestals, so they were tilting up. And this really handsome Italian guy was down there with some tools. I believe he was trying to disconnect the tweeter. And that was the first time that I ever laid eyes on Marco DiVirgilius. And I saw them rise from a small company in the basement at the NAMM show to owning a huge, if not the biggest, amp market in the world, and got to know them very well, and just loved working with them. What Mark Bass model do I use? Duh, I use the one that I designed. It's the STU. That's right. I went to Pescara, worked with Cecino, who's the electronics guy, and everyone there, and we designed an amp that could do it all, from all the strange gigs I do, from pop gigs to rock to jazz. So it's got a Class D solid state side and a tube side. You can mix and blend the two. 7-band graphic EQ. A lot of headroom that you can overdrive if you want that distorted sound. So I love it. Light on the compression, if not at all. So obviously I'm going to use that. What can I say? I use STU. You should too. What's great about Mark Bass is that it is such an industry standard now. If you go to a rock club, they'll usually have two house bass rigs, an Ampeg, big tube, 8x10, and a smaller, like maybe 4x10 or a Mark Bass combo, you know, solid state, something a little more modern sounding. So if I go to any situation, that's happened many times when I'm on the road or when I'm touring and using only backline, pretty much any Mark Bass amp that shows up, I know how to EQ it, which is basically flat, and how to get the sound of my fingers to come through the amplifier and to the listening audience. And that's the goal, right? The amplifier shouldn't create the sound, it should amplify the sound that you create with your fingers, in my opinion. So that's been wonderful, as well as just getting to know Marco and Riccardo, Cecino. And lastly, of course, I lived in Italy for a year in 1967 and 68 and have great memories and a deep love for Italia. So any chance that I've had, and I've had a few, to go to where the factory is in Pescara on the Abruzzo-Marche border and have some wonderful arrosticini and pizza di tutti di mare, I'm a happy guy. So great people to work with, very consistent in their production and very dependable electronics. And I am happy to continue working with Mark Bass.